This incident took place when I was in the 10th grade. My father was a clerk, and he was transferred to another city, so our entire family had to move with him. We left our old house and rented a new one in this other city. The doors of the new house were made of wood, and while the house was old, it was quite sturdy. It was located at the very end of a narrow alley. My mother spent the day doing household chores, while my father returned home from work in the evenings. We had been living there for about a week, and during that time, several terrifying events happened to us, which we tried to ignore. Sometimes, pots and pans in the kitchen would fall on their own, or metal glasses would clash with each other with a deafening noise. Occasionally, we'd hear the sound of a spoon hitting a plate, or the door would start banging violently. Whenever we opened the door, only darkness awaited us on the other side. We brushed these incidents off, thinking they were just our imagination. Often, my younger brother would get scared and start crying, and my mother would read Ayat al-Kursi, a Quranic verse, to reassure us. However, there was one particular place in the house that I found especially eerie and frightening: the stairs. The stairs were old and wooden, with a considerable gap between each step. An inexplicable sense of dread seemed to hang around them. Right below the stairs, there was a small door with a large, ancient-looking padlock. Since the door was under the stairs and out of view, we hadn't noticed it before. But when my mother realized there was a door there, she became fearful. Looking at it, it seemed like it was hiding something dark. I suggested to my mother that we open it to see what was inside. She replied, "Go ahead, try to open it if you can." I broke the lock with a large stone, and as soon as I opened the door, we heard a loud, terrifying scream. The sound was so dreadful that my mother nearly fainted from fear. My heart began racing, and my mother was engulfed in terror. She told me to close the door immediately, which I did. In the evening, when my father returned from work, my mother narrated the entire incident to him. After some thought, he instructed me to lock the door. My mother was so scared that she didn't dare go near that room again. Caught up in my studies and daily tasks, I forgot to put the lock back on the door. When my father returned that evening and asked if I had locked it, I lied to avoid his anger, saying I had done so. Later, I realized that if he noticed it in the morning, I'd be humiliated, so I planned to put the lock on after everyone had gone to sleep. Around midnight, I quietly took the lock and approached the old room. The door was open. As I was about to lock it, a thought struck me: to take a look inside and see what was in there. Instead of closing the door, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The door was small, so I had to crouch to enter. As soon as I stepped in, a strange fragrance enveloped me. I turned on my phone's flashlight and looked around. In front of me was a beautifully decorated bed, adorned with vibrant, colorful flowers, as if it was prepared for a bride's first night. One strange thing I noticed was that, although there was no light source in the room, it was brightly lit. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. Right above the bed, on the wall, hung a large, captivating portrait of a bride. She appeared so lifelike, almost as if she was smiling directly at me. I stood there, staring at the portrait, wondering who she was and why her picture was here. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, and I couldn't see a thing. I froze, wondering how the room had suddenly become pitch black. I started sweating, and just then, the light returned. Looking ahead, I was horrified to see the bride from the portrait standing in front of me in the flesh. I quickly turned to look at the wall where the portrait had been, but it was gone. There was no picture. I was terrified. My whole body started trembling. She smiled at me and said, "Don't be afraid, rest." I gathered the courage to ask, "Who are you?" She laughed and sat down on the bed, replying, "My name is Asma. I have been waiting for my husband for 100 years. He left me alone on our wedding night and never returned, and I died waiting for him. Now that you are here, why don't you marry me?" I was terrified by her words and ran out of the room as fast as I could, gasping for breath, my body trembling and forehead drenched with sweat. As soon as I stepped outside, the door shut tightly behind me. Then, I heard the call to prayer for dawn, Fajr. My parents were standing in front of me, and I nervously told them everything. My father slapped me and shouted, "Fool! When you knew there was something wrong with that room, why did you go inside?" My mother stopped him from hitting me further, saying, "What's the use of hitting him now? It won't change anything. We need to call someone who can help." She started crying. My father summoned some religious practitioners who performed some rituals to contain the spirit. They informed my father, "The spirit won't harm you now, but you'll have to leave this house. If you stay here, it may try to harm you again." Heeding their advice, my father decided to move, and a week later, we shifted to a new house. That incident remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my life.